to Good Morning Tobago right here on Tobago Updates. I am your host, Shenell Felix. I know whenever you see me sitting here, it's because we're about to have those conversations that you want to have while I ask the questions that you want asked. But before we get into this morning's interesting conversation, I want to invite you to share the live, as we have an extremely interesting discussion. Now, yesterday, we saw somewhat of a performance happening here on Tobago Updates. A lot of lively action on our morning show from ADFA as well as the leader of the Progressive Democratic Patriots, Mr. Watson Duke, talking about the oil spill, but in a very animated way. But we want to get down to the seriousness of this matter. The truth is, this oil spill has had an extremely detrimental impact in some cases for some fisher folk and their livelihood. Some persons are claiming through their press conference that they are no longer able to ply their trade because of the damage that was done to their vessel. Now, this morning we have invited the Secretary for Finance, Trade and the Economy, Councillor Petal-Ann Roberts, as well as Mr. Linford Beckles, who is the chairman of the Multidisciplinary Oil Spill Oversight Committee, to offer some clarity, some comfort, and giving us a better perspective from the angle of the THA on all that is happening and how can real assistance be given to the Tobago fisher folk. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Shenell, and good morning to Tobago. Thank you for having us.
So, Councillor Roberts, as I indicated before, during that press conference that was held by ADFA just 2 days ago, now as animated as it may have seemed, a lot of persons made a joke of it. We saw a lot of memes going around on social media and, people making light of the way that they expressed their concerns, wondering if they were truly serious. But there is seriousness when we look at the economic impact on the livelihood of a number of the fisher folk due to that oil spill that happened in Tobago. Now we have ADFA's President Curtis Douglas coming out and saying that the THA paid who they wanted to pay. They paid the Trinidad contractors and left the Tobagonians out in the cold. How do you respond to how that allocation, how that $50 million was allocated to equally spread to over all the contractors that participated in that oil spill cleanup?
Well, firstly, I'd like to say that this is a very serious matter for the government. We treated this matter seriously from day one on February 7th, and we continued. The government has set up, as you did indicate, a multidisciplinary committee, of which I was a part at the time. And I can say that we took steps, even though we did not have the resources from the parliamentary appropriation. We used every single cent in the contingency account. And I said this over and over again, and I hope that today, whatever I say today, without any emotions and performance, that persons will understand the seriousness of this matter. And this government has taken this matter seriously from day one. So as I did indicate, we did utilize the $15 million. And we didn't just pay $15 million. We said, you know what, the emergency phase of the oil spill, we're going to pay 6 of the contractors that did the majority of the cleanup works, of which ADFA was a part. Mm-hmm. So we took all of them seriously. We brought all of them in the room and we met with them one by one, not all together, but in segments. Mm-hmm. I think everybody probably had an hour with us. So we met the names that he called Tiger Tanks, Kaizen, Oil Map, ADFA, Tobago Marine. We met all the contractors that dealt with the cleanup efforts. And they all agreed with the decision at the end of the meetings. And the decision was, we are only going to pay some of your invoices. The government did not send any resources to take care of the oil spill at the time. And that meeting took place on April 30th. The oil spill took place in February. At the same time, we were paying invoices by shifting resources internally, meaning There's a line item for any extraordinary instances like an oil spill or any disaster, of which we were only allocated 2 million. We had spent about 700,000 at the time. So we started to pay some of the invoices from that. But the larger service providers, they were paid from contingency. We did contracts with them and they all agreed with the amounts. I think it was by May, these 6 contractors were paid. And basically they were paid for the month of February and in some cases, the beginning of March. And the reason why these contractors were paid in the millions, I'm sure you heard 18 million, 50 million, because they did works for that quantum of work. And then the 50 million came in June. Now, let me give you the story behind how the government came up with 50 million. At the mid-year, we requested 153 million for the oil spill. It included actual invoices on hand and the provision, because we couldn't tell when this thing would end. So the provision took us till September of 2024, and the provision took us to 153. When we did that and we submitted it, the government said, let me see your actual invoices for February and March. We submitted that. That came up to somewhere around 47 million. And that is where the $50 million came from. The government ideally is saying to us, unfortunately, we can only give you $50 million, which takes care of February and March. So the onus was now on us as a government to find money to pay April, May, and June. And as I would indicate, unfortunately, we still have about 15 suppliers to be paid of about $4.89 million, right? So I want to get to what was said yesterday in terms of compensation. In the provision that we made for compensation, we cannot tell what compensation is. We could have predicted or projected the cost of cleanup because we had bills for cleaning up. So it was easy to project that. And what we would have done, we reduced it as time went by. So for instance, we provided meals and accommodation. We took that out all entirely in the month of April. There were other costs that we didn't think that we would have needed, like cost of security, cost of toilets. We also demobilized is it the JOC you call it? JOC. The JOC, which was a temporary temporary command center. So we eliminated all of those costs. So the cost reduced over time in the provision. But in terms of compensation, we couldn't do an accurate provision for that. So I think that was underestimated. When the compensation was submitted by the fishermen, it came up to $47 million. So I'm hearing yesterday, pay these fishermen what is due to them. There's absolutely no way we can pay 47 million. But you know what? There's another committee that was set up to deal with the issues of the fishermen under the Division of Food Security. So we have the multidisciplinary committees that was set up by the Office of the Chief Secretary. And then we had another committee set up by the Food Security to look at compensation and all the issues relating to fishermen. That committee did extensive work in terms of evaluating the submissions from the fishermen. And at the end of that exercise, with the aid and assistance and guidance of people from the International Oil Spill Pollution Compensation, because they are accustomed doing this worldwide when oil spill occurred, they also were part of the evaluation and assessment process of the claims made by fishermen. And at the end, that came up to $4.2 million.
And these were what was deemed to be viable claims?
Yes, reasonable, based on the fact that, and I think Mr. Beckles will elaborate on that. I think that more had to do with persons in the Scarborough and Lambo area, those persons that were affected. Because the government only sent 50 million and we had all of these invoices, in the end we have paid so far $72 million. So the additional resources had to come from within. We could not pay the $4.2 million immediately. And as a matter of fact, the process is that you lean on the international IOPC, the International Agent IOPC, because they provide compensation for situations like oil spills. But you know what this government had said? Because that process may take so long, we will provide you with financial assistance, not compensation, financial assistance, because we know what you were affected by. So it's the persons who are proved to get the 4.2 million. We said we can only afford, based on the resources that we currently have, 2 million. And Ms. Felix, that is in process. The commitment was made in January when we did the press conference, but there is a process. The process of evaluating now, remember, persons would have sent in compensation claims. So you use that to determine how much they pay. We are now paying 2 million. What's the metric we're going to use? And we are trying to work out now a fair and reasonable determination of dispersing that 2 million to the fishermen. We are at the point where it's at the Division of Finance, between the Division of Finance and the division, where we're going to disperse funds very soon.
And Mr. Beckles, can you tell us some of the criteria that were used to remove some of the excess applications for things that may not have been reasonable?
All right. Good morning. First, let me just clarify my role in the entire oil spill response. So I was asked to be the chairman of the Multidisciplinary Oil Spill Management Committee. And that committee was essentially tasked with providing general oversight of the entire process and so on, to ensure efficiency in terms of the operations, and to make recommendations for payment of the services that were offered by the various contractors. And that was done, right? We had expertise of all kinds available to the committee, but where we felt that we needed additional support in terms of expertise, we sought that from outside the committee. Before I answer your question directly, I just want to make the point that the ATFA, right, the All Tobago Fisherfolk Association, they were of course one of the contractors that provided really important service to us throughout the process, and it is already established that that organization is owed monies by the Tobago House of Assembly for services provided, and the Tobago House of Assembly has paid a part of it and remains committed to paying the outstanding sum. With respect to compensation, Ms. Felix, I was not part of the committee that was set up to deal with the matter of compensation, right? That committee is a committee that is established under the Division of Food Security, and that is chaired by Mr. Alan Stewart, who you all know quite well because he's normally a frequent visitor and so on this particular program. So I cannot speak authoritatively on all of the metrics and so on. But what I can say is that the committee that was set up to look at this and so on, they would have used international best practice in informing the decisions that they made, and a lot of these decisions and the way that they arrived at the decisions, it was explained in the press conference that was held in January of this year, explained by Mr. Stewart and by Mr. Derek Leet and so on, an economist and so on at the Division of Finance, who was integrally involved in the process. The process, as explained then, seemed quite reasonable to me. I mean, I also have qualifications in economics and stuff, and they seem quite reasonable to me in terms of the econometric modeling and stuff that was actually used. But in terms of all of the criteria and so on, it's not something that I can speak authoritatively on.
Understood. And when we look at the demographic of fisherfolk who submitted claims, geographically, we had some persons from the Scarborough area, some persons basically from Tobago West and Tobago East. So is it that you completely eliminated the fisherfolk who came from North Side and the East who tried to make claims for compensation?
Well, again, I can't speak authoritatively on it, but I was at the last press conference, and I do have interactions with Mr. Stewart and Mr. Leith and so on, who are integrally involved in the process. And on the basis of my interaction with them and so on, the process did not exclude people who were from outside of the geographical area defined as Lambo. Right? There were other people from other areas and so on who they felt whose claims they felt could actually be justified. With respect to how many of those persons are actually included and so on or recommended for compensation, I cannot say. But I do know that there are persons from outside of the Lambo areas whose claim the committee considered to be justifiable.
And Councillor Roberts, when we look at it overall, we don't want persons to confuse the compensation for fisher folk with the contractors. So can you make that key distinction for the public so that they understand who were paid already and the finances surrounding that as opposed to the compensation that the fisher folk are now protesting for?
Right. So the oil spill expenditure is, I would say, divided into two categories. So we have service providers, persons who would have worked for the oil spill in the cleanup efforts, who have provided meals, transportation, materials. And for that, we have already paid $72 million. Yesterday, you did hear that we did pay $1,000 in the early parts. That was somewhere in February. Because at the time, we didn't have the resources. We didn't know the quantum. There was no metric as to what the compensation should be. So the government said, all right, let us pay. Because at the time, fishermen in certain areas of Tobago could not fish within their jurisdiction, the areas that they are accustomed plying their fishing trade. So we did give $1,000 to, I think, about 100 fishermen of persons affected. Then we had the services provided. And that, as I said, we first utilized funding from contingency. The government sent 50 million, and then we shifted resources internally. And that's how we came up with the 72 million. The 2 million that we're going to use now, we're going to shift resources again. And that is, I don't even want to call that compensation. As I did indicate, we are not paying compensation because the compensation claims came up to $47 million, and that was about 167 claims. So 167 persons in Tobago submitted and said, this is how I was affected. But there was an evaluation process, and it came down to about 20-something fishermen and persons affected. I don't think it was only fishermen, but persons who ply their trade in the areas and were affected. And that came up to about 4.2 million. However, as I did indicate, because the usually compensation of this nature, where oil spills occur across the world, the IOPC is the agency that you lean on for compensation. So the THA decided, we will pay you financial assistance because of the losses that you would have incurred. And it's the same persons who were at the end of the evaluation process. Those 20-something persons, those are the ones that would be paid out of the 2 million.
Totally understood. Now, guys, we're going to take a quick break right here, and we'll be back as we continue this discussion this morning. See you soon. Morning, and welcome back to Good Morning Tobago right here on Tobago Updates this morning. We have been chatting with Councillor Petal-Ann Roberts as well as Mr. Linford Beckles, who was the chairman of the Multidisciplinary Oil Spill Oversight Committee. They are offering clarity and, I'm guessing, some comfort to the fisher folk in Tobago, as Councillor Roberts has indicated that the THA would be paying assistance to the fisher folk, not the compensation that they have filed to the IOPC. Now, explain that to us, because persons are or may think that you are using this 2 million that you have to pay those claims, but you are saying this is not the claim. The claim would still be fulfilled by the IOPC. If the IOPC does their part. So can you explain the difference
Right
in those?
So the IOPC is a separate entity from the THA, and I don't know the parameters. I don't know the criteria. However, I know Mr. Alan Stewart was charged with the responsibility for assisting the fishermen and the fisher folk and all the stakeholders in the fishing industry who wants to apply for compensation to the IOPC, that he would provide that kind of technical assistance. So I cannot say how the IOPC does their assessment of claims. I know that you have to put in your application for your claim, and they will do the rest. And because we don't know how long that will take, we don't even know if they will meet the criteria. We are saying we're going to pay you despite all of that, but we cannot pay you a compensation or what you deem to be compensation. I think the metric would be, I'm not sure, because this would be expedited by the Division of Food Security. The idea is if the claims came up to 4.2 million, and well, after we did our assessment, and we are going to pay 2 million, most likely you're going to get half of what the recommended sum was at the end of the assessment period, if you understand what I mean. So most likely, for instance, I'm seeing a fisherman here whose recommended amount is 468,000. He may get half of that in the 2 million as part of what we deem to be financial assistance, because as a government, we feel that we have a responsibility to help you because of this unforeseen catastrophe.
So you are saying that the THA has put aside the funds to help the fisher folk. The assistance is going to come through this assistance,
right?
But they have to wait.
Right. So the waiting is really two things. One, as Secretary of Finance, I can tell you I do not receive funding in accordance with the law. I've said that time and time again. The law says in the THA Act that we should receive our releases from Trinidad quarterly, so every quarter or block in advance. So at the beginning of the quarter, I should receive all the monies for the 3 months. And that does not happen, right? Because the government has indicated that they don't have the resources to do that. And because of that, I cannot honor things as they come. It has to wait until I receive resources from the central government. This 2 million, though, was not set aside. However, we have decided to shelve some of our initiatives that we want to do and put the resources towards the financial assistance, and that would be paid under the Division of Food Security. As a matter of fact, at first we were looking at the contingency account, but we used the contingency's money to pay ADFA $1.9 million within the last 3 weeks. So the monies that we had set aside for compensation or anything like that, not payment of services, that monies we use it to pay ADFA because we had some outstanding sums for him. He got paid the association, not him. The association was paid $1.1 million. The early pass where we paid 6 contractors, and then they were paid about $1.99 million 3 weeks ago. That makes it about $3 million, and the total sum owed was about $6 million. There is a process, though, of due diligence with all of our contractors, and Mr. Beckles can tell you, we sat and negotiated with each and every one of them to the point where some of them gave us discounts. So in some cases, they provided their invoices and we sat with them and said, look, these seem exorbitant or not reasonable. Right, and we would have negotiated with some of the service contractors, and we have done that with ADFA as well. We brought their invoices, we looked at the rates, and they agreed in some cases to reduce in some cases. So the same process will apply with the balance owed to ADFA.
Understood. And to you, Mr. Beckles, how important has it been for the Multidisciplinary Oil Spill Oversight Committee to have continuous communication with the fisher folk? Because from what I am seeing, the protest or the press conference that took place just 2 days ago, these types of demonstrations can be avoided by having that consistent communication. What are the lines of communication between the committee and not necessarily ADFA, but the fisher folk, to ensure that they are understanding what is happening, the process and the time that they have to wait, but that the assistance is coming?
Well, we have, throughout the process, we have had communication with all of the contractors. As Secretary Roberts would have explained a bit earlier, the Tobago House of Assembly was not in a position to pay the invoices at the time that many of the contractors expected the invoices to be paid. And therefore, that required, communication with them and so on to let them know exactly what our position was. And thankfully, many of them demonstrated the kind of patience and so on that we were really looking for, including ATFA. Let me just put that on the record. Further, as she would have indicated, we had continuous conversations in terms of the assessment of the claims and so on, and engaging in a process of negotiation and so on, so that the Tobago House Assembly would be in a better position in terms of getting greater value for the money that was actually spent. What I'd like to say is something that is relatively personal. Now, I know Mr. Douglas quite well. I have known Mr. Douglas since probably 1995, thereabout. All right. So a very, very long time and so on. Right. Mr. Douglas and I used to play football together on opposing teams, of course, and so on. Right. And we still maintain a very good relationship. Right. So, as the chairman of the committee, and on a personal level, I am always in contact. I'm always in contact with Mr. Douglas and so on, right? We have short conversations. Some of the conversations are also very, very lengthy. The conversations are also very open and very frank and so on, right? But nonetheless, we maintain a very good relationship. I maintain a very good relationship with Mr. Douglas and with ATFA. However, notwithstanding conversations that are had, I think that sometimes you can understand if people are owed monies and so on, and it's a little lengthy. Sometimes people may become a little impatient and so on, and that is okay and stuff, right? That is a part of the process. That is quite fine, all right? But I also understand Mr. Douglas's position as the head representative of an organization. I mean, Mr. Douglas is not any different from a trade union leader, and so on, right? I think that's the best way to understand his role and to understand the kind of advocacy and so on that he actually brings forward and so on, and that is fine. He has a duty to represent the interests of his members and so on, and we have our responsibility to listen, and we have our responsibility to respond as the resources allow us to.
Understood. Well, we are going to take a quick break right here, and we'll be back right after this. So see you soon. It's a brand new morning. Good morning, and welcome back to Good Morning Tobago right here on Tobago Updates. We have been chatting with Councillor Petal-Ann Roberts as well as Mr. Linford Beckles. Now, before we left off to the break, Mr. Beckles was indicating that there is a good line of communication with ADFA, and you also indicated that there has been good communication between the division and the fisherfolk through the Oil Spill Oversight Committee and through TEMA, because TEMA is now providing the type of assistance that is needed for the fisherfolk to apply for that compensation from the IOPC. Now, I remember having a conversation here on Tobago Updates where I would have made an error in suggesting that the representative for Tobago East was providing that type of support at her office in CAS. And they made it a point to ensure that I let Tobagonians know that they were not providing any assistance at all, and that fell squarely in the laps of the THA. How important is it for the fisherfolk to understand that the assistance needed is there for them to come to the THA and get that type of help?
But before I respond to what you just asked me to respond to, I just want to elaborate on a point of the relationship that the THA has with the stakeholders. From day one, as I did indicate, we met with stakeholders one-on-one, of which ADFA was a part of that communication, those meetings, and it has always been cordial. I don't know Mr. Douglas personally. I know him as the president of the Fisher Folk, and I met him when we were doing the exercise of explaining to them, this is the resources that we have available, this is what we intend to pay. And at that meeting, we took out the invoices, we went through them, and we said, all right, can we reduce? We negotiated some of the prices, and it was good. You know, he and I did communicate at the time when the contract had to be signed, because at that time I was not Secretary of Finance. I was the accountant on the the finance person on the multidisciplinary committee. And from that time onwards, behind closed doors, it has never been antagonistic or to the point of disrespect, disregard, and bringing anybody into disrepute. So it is quite appalling to hear what I heard yesterday and what I've been hearing in this space, because we have always had the communication lines open. I think there was 1 or 2 times Mr. Douglas did call me. I did answer. He said, I would like to come and see you, but it just never materialized. So the performance in the public space, I think that is just what it is, a performance. But the reality is we have been having conversations with all the stakeholders. There are even persons, there are about 15 persons we still owe. Some of them know me as Tobagonians. We know one another. They will ask when I get in my money, right? And I will do the same explanation, but there is no public performance, because persons have been patient with us. And I think for the most part, persons understand what the Tobago House of Assembly faces in terms of financial challenges, in terms of liquidity, and having readily available resources. So in response to your question, the expectation of the Fisher Folk in terms of applying for
the resources available.
So as I did indicate before, TEMA, the head of TEMA, will provide technical assistance to apply to the IOPC. We will provide, and we'll be very open and transparent, because the Chief Secretary has mandated that we be very transparent. I have done a press conference in January where I listed out every single service provider that was paid and how much is outstanding and who is outstanding. We will do the same thing for the financial assistance to the Fisher Folk.
I'm guessing without revealing their names, that is
well,
for
because
privacy.
It's public funds, we remain very mal. Because you see, I don't know the form on which I would not be doing that, because that will come from the Division of Food Security. But the Chief Secretary wants it to be very transparent on what we have paid in terms of financial assistance. Yeah. At some point in time, Mr. Alan Stewart will provide an update on the process of applying to the IOPC for the compensation, whenever that time is right. I don't know. I'm not part of that discussion with Mr. Stewart.
Right. So would there, Mr. Beckles, can you tell us if there would be any follow-up discussions with the Fisher Folk to explain to them a little bit of what you have explained here this morning in terms of them having to hold strain, as we say here in Tobago?
Well, as I indicated, I'm always in contact with the president of ATFA as it relates to the outstanding monies owed to ATFA for the services that they provided to the Tobago House of Assembly in the context of the oil spill response and cleanup and so on. Right? That is something that I am committed to. Right, and I think that Mr. Douglas knows that is something that I am committed to, and so on. Right, I do understand the position of ATFA and the fishermen and so on with respect to the monies owed. It is something that I am sympathetic to. However, the Tobago House of Assembly at this time doesn't have all of the resources that are required to fulfill our payment obligations and so on, right? But notwithstanding that, the Tobago House of Assembly remains firmly committed to paying all of the service providers who would have assisted us with the oil spill response.
Excellent. And again, we want to make that distinction between the payment of service providers and the assistance, not compensation, because the IOPC is responsible for that compensation. and the assistance being meted out to the fisher folk using that 2 million that would have been shifted around to assist at this time. Now, you have a lot of persons saying the true issue that they are having is that in the beginning, the chief secretary came out and said, we are going to compensate the fisher folk. And then he came back and said, well, we had the conversation with the IOPC and they recommended that they pay the fisher folk. And you have Mr. Curtis Douglas asking, why would you allow any international organization or anybody from central government to tell you what to do to help your Tobagonian brothers and sisters? Can you clarify that for us?
I'll just clarify in brief because I was not a part of the committee, but I can tell you something. An oil spill is an unforeseen circumstance. We do not have any expertise in oil spill. As a matter of fact, I remember in the early parts we had Petrobras out of Brazil, and we had some other international bodies coming to Tobago to give us guidance. It is only fair that we seek the guidance of the international experts for the oil spill related activities. The gentleman they are speaking about, he only gave guidance to the committee out of the Division of Food Security at the time when they were doing the assessment. Because really and truly, as I said, we do not have all the expertise here. We have very excellent and competent persons like Mr. Derek Leet, Mr. Alan Stewart, who has been in this thing from day one. We have ADFA on that committee. We have representatives from TUFA because we wanted all the stakeholders in the room. But to say an actual oil spill in terms of how you deal with the metric and the methodology, we had to bring the expert. And that is what the expert said. As a matter of fact, it is only a recommendation to guide us as to whether we should pay or not. And the government of Tobago still said, all right, because you have recommended this to us, we will still pay a $2 million out of what we have, of the little available resources.
And from that miscommunication, that has caused a bit of a rift in the relationship between the THA and the fisher folk. What is going to be done moving forward to try to mend that relationship and allow the fisher folk to understand that outside of the noise and the performances and the miscommunication, the THA is doing all that it can, even though the IOPC is still available for you to submit your claims to ensure that we can provide a temporary mechanism to assist you financially.
You know what is interesting, Shenell? There's a committee at the Division of Food Security that deals specifically with the stakeholders. And you know who sits on that committee? The same agents of these associations. So I don't understand who else must speak to the associations of fisher folk and persons in the fishing industry, but those two representatives sitting on the committee. And that's Mr. Curtis Douglas. I cannot remember what's the other guy from TUFA. But they sit on that committee whereby they were the ones that did the evaluation of the fishermen compensation. The THA continues, as I did indicate, Mr. Beckles says he has conversations with them all the time. The Division of Food Security that falls under their remit, they are the ones who have direct contact with the fisher folk. And Mr. Alan Stewart, who was mandated to give them that kind of support and technical guidance for. So we have always been in conversation with the stakeholders. We have never left them in the dark. We have never left them out. We have always had their interests at heart.
So I'm guessing you were quite surprised when you saw the press
I was not. I was disappointed, but not surprised because I understand I understand one of the gentlemen who is pushing this kind of narrative, and that is what they do, and we just have to understand that that is what they do. What disappointed him is Mr. Douglas, because Mr. Douglas understood from day one. And I was also disappointed because we paid Mr. Douglas, although he was in this space saying that he was not paid. We paid him in 2 tranches. He got $1.1 million. Then he got $1.9 million. We still have outstanding sums, which are currently under the due diligence process of the accounting process. So I am not surprised, but I'm disappointed.
Understood. And is there anything you want to say to the fisher folk in Tobago as we close off this morning?
Definitely. First thing I want to say that we are committed to paying the financial assistance. I don't do the payment. We are now in process of shifting the resources to the Division of Food Security, and at the same time shifting the resources to pay the balance for service providers at the Office of the Chief Secretary. We have not left out the fisher folk. I must say with a level of assurance that they will be paid the $2 million. I cannot say who gets what amount. The Division of Food Security will determine that, and they will communicate as such.
Understood. Well, we want to thank you so much, Mr. Linford Beckles, as well as you, Councillor Roberts, for coming and taking the time to offer that insight, that comfort, and that clarity in the midst of everything that has happened and the press conference that was held by the All Tobago Fisher Folk Association with the fisher folk feeling a bit disgruntled, feeling abandoned. But you are now saying that the very Curtis Douglas that was in the front, of that march sits on these committees.
Well, one of the committee, not the
sits on that committee at the Division of Food Security and has been given that constant communication on where the THA is as it relates to those payments.
Yes.
All right. Well, guys, you heard it here this morning. We want to thank you so much for being a part of the discussion, and we hope that even as ADFA has received their payment, that we will see that contributed to the growth and development of the fishing industry here on the island of Tobago. Guys, we want to thank you so much for your likes, your shares, your comments, for your engagement in this morning's discussion. And we want to say have a great day.
Start to rise, the energy fill the sky.